What are the best ways to store and organize your comic books? In this video, I'm going to go over some tips and tricks on how to best manage your comic book collection. I've been a comic book collector for a pretty long time, actually over 40 years, and currently my comic book collection is about 4,000 comic books. Actually, at one time, it used to be well over twice that, but I've pared down. But during that time, I've managed to learn some tips and tricks on how to best organize and store my comic books. And I'm going to share some of these tips and tricks in this video. Okay, number one. Now this may surprise you, but in my opinion, the most important aspect about storing your comic books is the environment. So why is that important? Let me give you an example. The world's most famous collection, the Edgar Church or Mile High collection, were found to be in near pristine condition. And this wasn't because they were stored in expensive fancy bags with acid-free backboards, because at that time those just didn't exist. It's because of the environment they were stored in. And it's actually pretty simple. Keep your comic books cool, dry, and dark. This is very important. You want to avoid keeping your comic books in a high heat or a high humidity environment. You don't want to store your comic books in the attic. You don't want to store your comic books in a humid basement. With high heat, it accelerates the aging process of your comic books. As well as humidity can also do a lot of bad things to your comic books. So keep them cool, keep them dry, and keep them in the dark. You don't want to keep your comic books out in the bright sunlight or in high intensity light, because what that will do is that will fade the colors of the cover on your comic books. Now this isn't that big of a deal because most of your comic books will be stored in boxes for most of the time, but it's a consideration if you want to display your comic books, that you get some kind of like UV protection through whatever storage option that you have or display option that you have for your comic book, because you don't want the colors of the comic book to fade. Okay, let's talk about boxes. There are essentially two types of popular boxes at this moment. The classic long box and what's become more popular, the short box. Now, I've kind of moved towards the short box, and the reason for that is actually kind of simple. I'm getting old. Comic books in long boxes are heavier, they're kind of unwieldy. Short boxes are easier to kind of organize your books, and they're certainly easier to move around and carry. Now, if you have a lot of comic books, like thousands of comic books, it's just more economical to keep your comic books in long boxes. I personally prefer short boxes, and if you're fortunate like me to have like a shelf on the back, short boxes fit nicely and are easier to access. Boxes come in different material formats. Cardboard is the most common, plastic, and then like really rigid plastic. I actually prefer the corrugated plastic because they are more durable. And if you ever plan on doing a flea market or a convention or a show or something, they could withstand a lot of abuse. And that's kind of important because what I've learned, because at one time I used to do shows, is that cardboard boxes, well, after a while, they will fall apart, especially if you're moving them around a lot. I get my plastic boxes at a place called Comic Pro. They have an online store, and they are based in Canada, so that's advantageous for me as well. If I purchase more than $100 worth of supplies, I don't have to pay for shipping. Now, I'm not getting sponsored by these guys, and their boxes are by no means perfect because I have to kind of do some modifications to make them work for me. The prices are very good, and the product is pretty reasonable. So let's take a closer look. Okay, here's an example of a short box that's made out of this corrugated plastic. Now, I bought these in a bulk box of 20 to save a lot of money. And interestingly, these type of boxes are a lot cheaper now than they used to be, and they're easier to find. There's a Canadian supplier called Comic Pro, and with This is not, I'm not affiliated with them in any ways. Like they're not sponsoring this, but they have short boxes like these. They come in white. They also come in gray and black. And if you buy them in packages of 20, you get a better deal. Now, they also have long boxes as well, too. But what I'm finding now as I'm getting older as well, too, long boxes are a little more unwieldy in that when you put comic books in them, they get pretty heavy, especially if they are modern comic books. Not so much for these older books, but for modern comic books, absolutely. But these are not without their faults. Now, if you notice, I'm going to put this back on. If I lift this up, these have these handles over here, and which are great for grabbing them, but the handles, what they do is they protrude on the inside. So I actually had to build a bit of a buffer on the inside over here and on the back so that the handles don't butt up against the comic book. I usually put a couple backboards in there to give a bit of a buffer as well. Otherwise, these handles will put an impression on the front of the first book in the box. So you got to be wary about that. As well, I found these boxes just to be a bit too tall. So what I do is I put a few backboards on the top, as well as I trimmed probably about 1 centimeter or half an inch from the top, so that the comic books on the inside are a little more flush. And the reason why I do that is because if you start to stack these, 2, 3, 4 up, what's going to happen is, without these being more flush, is that the top of the lid is gonna basically cave in. It's basically gonna wreck the boxes at the bottom of your shelves. So they're fairly easy to put together, but they ended up actually taking a much longer time because I had to make these modifications. I had to put a buffer on the inside to protect the first book, and I had to trim the top edge about half an inch, about 1 centimeter, so that the books are a little more flush. All right, let's take a look at some of these books in the box. Now, I like to organize my comic books by publisher and then by alphabetic order, but it's more personal preference. So my Marvel comic books are together, and my DC comic books are together, and I have another box for like independents, or a few boxes for independents. Now, if you were to look at what I consider to be kind of like my personal collection, what people call their PC, it's mostly Bronze Age, so stuff from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Now, the 80s certainly was when I first started collecting, so that's by far the most nostalgic, but, as you start collecting and become more aware of other titles, you will go back. And I'm fond of certainly of horror titles, Marvel horror titles, especially kind of these obscure reprint titles. So, this is my kind of run of Uncanny Tales. And I'm kind of a high-grade junkie. In general, I'll only look for high-grade copies. And as well, I like good deals. So I generally don't like paying a lot of money for these. So a lot of these I've acquired over the years, and they've just kind of remained in my personal collection. So I run a Vault of Evil. This is a title that actually lasted a lot more issues than some of the other horror reprint titles. This is a reprint cover from a Marvel Tales from the 1950s, I believe. Some of these are reprint covers from other Atlas titles. I think this one's an Uncanny Tales one. And they're Vault of Evil, but these are great. And I like these because as a seasoned collector, these are kind of obscure, kind of hard to find. And it's always kind of like the challenge of the hunt. Another option is to make your own boxes. If you're handy or crafty and you have time, this is certainly a good option. I've made a couple custom boxes for myself just because for Golden Age books, you can't really buy boxes that fit Golden Age books nicely. I used to use magazine boxes, but I just found the books move around inside them too much. And I just found that making my own box was a better option. Now, this is a time-consuming process. And maybe if people comment or want to know more details about how I made these boxes, I can make a future video. But I can just kind of show you what they look like. Because, boxes aren't really... Making a box is not really rocket science. You just need, a sheet of cardboard, some glue, and a knife, like a straight edge, like a box cutter knife. It's not a complicated design. So this is an example of a custom box that I've made for Golden Age books. What you want to find is a large sheet of cardboard. I actually found one that actually has this, which is kind of cool. But it's basically a standard box. What I've done is I've used like old backboards to kind of reinforce the corners, and that's just with glue. If you look on the inside, I've done that with the edges as well too. It's essentially just basically 4 sides folded up, and then I put 2 pieces of cardboard at the end to glue. If you can take a look over here, like so. And then again, I used reusing old pieces of backboard to kind of like make the edges more stronger. Gotta keep your precious copies of Black Hawk in a safe box. So like I said, Golden Age boxes are it's hard to find boxes that will fit Golden Age books nicely. So in this case, that's what I did for these books. Maybe at some point, if enough people are kind of interested, I can certainly make a video about how to make one of these boxes in detail. But it's really not that complicated. They do take time, though. They do take time. Okay, so for CGC books, or for your slab books, I do like these BCW plastic boxes. Now, they're certainly more expensive, but I think they're well worth it, especially considering that, your slab books are typically more expensive and you want them well protected. And these do a good job. As well, they are stackable. So you can, they have these little grooves that will stack them so they don't move. So I find that's really, really good. I own 3 of these. I guess I have like about 80 or 90 CGC books. Getting your books graded is an entire different topic, which I'll probably do another video for. But you can take a peek and see what are some of the CGC books that I have. Most of my collection is Bronze Age. I do have some Silver Age and a small amount of Golden Age, but I do have some pretty nice Bronze Age books, like Godzilla #1 in a 9/8, which has gotten quite hot recently. Other stuff like, Howard the Duck #1. So I do like getting first issues slabbed. Marvel Superheroes Contest of Champions. Now this, I'm probably going to make a video on as well too, because this was one of the first comic books I've ever owned. Not this copy, but one of the first comic books I ever read that was given to me, and it's a really good one. Let's see, got a Marvel Team Up number 53, first John Byrne X-Men. We have a really nice copy of Miss Marvel #1. We got a Nova #1. Another weird stuff like Omega the Unknown #1. It's like, why on earth would I get this graded? Well, I actually thought it was going to come back a lot higher. But, it's the first issue. Not worth a heck of a lot in 9.4, but, it's kind of stuff that I like. Bags and boards. During COVID, I had a lot of time, and one project I wanted to do was to actually go back and rebag all my comic books. Now I use 2 different types of bags. A Polypro bag, which is 2 mil, and a Mylar bag. And the way I decide on which bag to use for the comic book is basically the value of the book. Now, I like to store my comic books in ones that are like $15 or more. I will put them in My Lights. And the advantage of My Lights is once you bag them, you never have to bag them again. And the thing with other non-My Light bags is that over a period of time, the gases inside the comic book from the paper will start to make the bag kind of bubble and warp. And if you're kind of obsessive compulsive like I am, you don't necessarily like that. So Mylar is definitely the way to go. And I get my Mylar bags or Mylites. They're like these 2 mil bags, also from Comic Pro. And again, and the reason why is because they're very inexpensive compared to other manufacturers like Bill Cole. If you order enough of them, the shipping is free. So that's a huge plus. This is one of my favorite Bronze Age runs, Jim Starlin's Warlock run. And another thing that's kind of like a thing with collectors is stuff that they really like, they'll often get multiple copies. I can't explain that. So this is my Starlin Warlock run. It's number 10. Number 11 may be one of the best issues of the run. It basically, foreshadows his death. 11, 12, a great issue featuring Pip the Troll. I got 2 of those, yeah. 13, Star Thief. Yeah, as you can tell, I really like Warlock. Number 14. The weird thing is I thought I had a 15, but I don't. Some bags are worse than others. I found the BCW bags, because they're thinner, tend to kind of get wavy faster than the Comic Pro line bags. But Comic Pro line bags are not immune to this as well too. I do find that the Comic Pro line poly bags are of better quality and at the price point, just a better buy. Now they say you should rebag your comic books every 4 to 5 years. And while ideal, let's be honest, it's not cheap and it's a very labor intensive process. I've had comic books in the same bags for 20 plus years, and when I took them out, they still look great. Now, I wouldn't recommend keeping your comic books in the same bag for 20 plus years, but in the right environment, keeping them cool, dry, and dark, they won't suffer that much damage. Once you put your books in Mylites or these Mylar bags, they're very nice. They make your books really shiny and they're so clear. It's hard to go to other bags after that. I typically only buy the Silver Age size bags along with the Silver Age size backboards because those fit snugly, and in the boxes they also fit very nicely, and it's kind of like a one size fits all. What you want to do is you want to make sure that the corners of your comic books are protected, and Silver Age size bags and boards do a really good job of that. The thickness that I buy is 28 point, and that's more just economical. They're cheaper, and if I want to protect the book better, like for a more expensive book, I'll double up the backboards. They do have thicker backboards available for sale, but it's actually cheaper to use 2 28-point boards than use one 56-point board. But again, personal preference. If you've got the money, the 56-point boards are certainly good. But also keep in mind that using the thicker boards will take up more space in your boxes. If you got a lot of comic books, that space really adds up. I have reused some of my backboards, especially the ones that I felt were better quality. I had like these 40-point boards that I've been using for a long time, and it's certainly okay to reuse those. Now, what tape do I use to close the flap on comic books? I just use the standard Scotch tape. And for me, I've actually found the painter's tape, well, in terms of how long the painter's tape will last, I found masking tape on comic books can kind of get really gummy and yucky after a period of time. And it's also thicker. So masking tape or painter's tape is generally just used as a temporary measure. But I understand why a lot of collectors use it, because if you ever get the tape stuck on a comic book, it won't do the dreaded pull. It won't pull the cover off as well when you peel it. Whereas with other tapes like Scotch tape, it definitely can do a lot of damage. So I certainly exercise a lot of caution when I take a comic book out of the bag. I will often also take the tape off and then replace the tape. That way you know it's not going to damage your book. I think aesthetic reasons as well too. I just kind of prefer that clear transparency on the back of the book. And go with the regular Scotch tape. Don't get that dollar store stuff because that stuff is garbage. It'll tear when you open the flap. Go with the better quality stuff, and you don't have to put a long strip. You can just put you can use a short strip and just have a little bit at the bottom of the flap, and I find that really works well for me. But again, I get why people use painter's tape, especially if you sell comic books, because the last thing what you want is to have a person who buys your comic book have to deal with messy Scotch tape that may damage their book. So certainly, if you're selling comic books, painter's tape makes a lot more sense. But for me, for my personal comic books, Scotch tape is fine. Organizing and cataloging your comic books. Now, the standard way is just alphanumeric. You go by title and then by number. And if you go to a comic book store, they'll typically organize their back issues like this because it just makes it easier to find a particular book. But really, it comes down to personal preference. For me, I like to organize my books by Marvel, DC, and Independence. And then I'll further kind of subdivide that into books, what I consider to be part of my personal collection, and books that, well, maybe at some point I'll move or trade, or they're not as important to me. There are a lot of different apps out there that can help you catalog and organize your books, but I'm kind of old school. I just use a spreadsheet. I just use Google Sheets. I'll have the title, the issue, the condition of the comic book, the price I paid for it if I remember, as well as when I bought it. So just simple information like that I think is useful. I'm kind of open to trying one of these apps at some point in the road, but having it kind of in a spreadsheet, in a simple kind of text form is good because that could potentially let you port that information to whatever app that you're using. One thing that I think is kind of useful as well too in terms of organizing your boxes is to have a couple extra. One as a to read box as well as one to sort box. And this I think is helpful because it certainly can kind of encourage you to figure out which books you want to read and organize that. And having a sort box is kind of good because you can kind of let some books accumulate there before you decide to put it into whichever kind of box that you want, whether it's going to be your keep box or your trade box or your sell box or however you want to do it. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this information useful. I would be happy to answer any questions you have with regards to comic book collecting or more questions about organizing and storing your comic books. In case you're curious, I do have more videos on comic book collecting that you can check out over here. And until next time, keep reading and collecting comic books.